It's Sarah. Welcome to my crochet channel. Today's video, I'm going to show you how to crochet the Think Pink lap blanket. Now, even though I've designed this pattern to be released here in October for breast cancer awareness, this blanket, of course, can be made in any colors of your choosing. This yarn was given to me by a dear friend. She sent it to me in a package, and it's called Premier's DK Colors, and it is a number 3 weight yarn. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But the colors were in a cake, and they moved smoothly along. So this is not 4 different colors, or even 5. It's just how the cake was done. I'm going to give you some other options of yarns that you can use as well when we move farther along in the video. The original pattern that I wrote for this measures 26 inches wide, so it's just wide enough to fit over your lap, and 36 inches long. I'm also going to give you the information to do the multiples so that you can make it longer and wider. And we'll talk about that also a little bit farther on in the video. This crochet pattern is a free pattern on my blog, and you can find that link down in the notes underneath this video. All right, let's talk yarns. This is the yarn that I used. It takes 2 of these cakes. 1 cake is 5 ounces, so you need 10 ounces of yarn. This yarn is a number 3 yarn, and that's what we made the blanket out of. So you need 10 ounces of a number 3 light yarn. Some other good choices is your Mandela yarns, and this one is a Mandela Sparkle. This one has 3.5 ounces, so you're going to need a couple of these, probably 3, to make the blanket. Another good choice is this ice cream yarn. This one happens to be in a pink variegated, so it's also a good choice. But remember, you can use any light number 3 yarn, and you're going to need 10 ounces, or approximately 766 yards. And again, the color choices are up to you. We'll be stitching with our H hook, and the H hook is a 5.0 millimeter crochet hook. You'll need your scissors, of course, and then also you'll need a needle just to weave in those ends. Now the next thing I want to talk to you about is how to adjust the size of your blanket. Like I said at the beginning, the blanket measures 26 inches wide and 36 inches long. And I'm saying approximately because remember, everyone stitches differently. Some stitch looser, some stitch tighter. So keep that in mind when you're measuring your blanket. Now, 3 foundation double crochets equal approximately an inch. And 3 rows equal approximately 2 inches. And that's just FYI. To do the blanket in multiples, you're going to need to do multiples of 2 plus 6. For instance, you can do 2 times 100 and do 200 stitches, and then you'll need to add those 6 extra stitches on the end for your blanket. So you'll need to do multiples of 2 plus 6, and that's for your width. To make the blanket longer, of course, you're just going to continue to repeat the patterns that I'm going to show you for the length of the blanket that you need. And if 3 rows equal approximately 2 inches, you can measure the length and do as many repeats as you need for the length that you need. So basically, you can use this stitch pattern to make the blanket as wide as you want or as long as you want. So what we're going to do to begin is we're going to stitch foundation double crochets, or what's called a chainless foundation double crochet. You're going to need to stitch if you're making it according to the size that I made, you're going to need to stitch 76 foundation double crochets. Now remember, if you're adjusting the pattern wider, you'll need to do in increments of 2 stitches to make it wider. All right, let's get started. I'm not going to be doing the whole 76. I'm going to be doing a swatch to show you since I've already completed my blanket. We're going to begin with our slip knot. We're going to chain 4. Yarn over, go in the 4th chain and pull up a loop. We're going to go over, yarn over our hook, go through just that first loop. We've created our chain. Now we're going to yarn over and finish our double crochet. Our chain 3 counted as our first, and now we've stitched our second. Yarn over, we're going to go in that chain that we created with our first stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through just that first loop, yarn over, go through the second 2, yarn over and go through the third 2. And that's going to create our foundation double crochet. And something that you can do when you're making a long foundation double crochet or chain, you can use stitch markers. And what I do is when I'm making a long one like that, I'll do 10 or 20 foundation double crochets, and then I'll mark it with a stitch marker. Then I don't have to recount, and then every 10 or 20, depending on what I'm making. For this one, since I would be doing 76 foundation double crochets, I might do every 20, and that way I don't have to keep recounting. Just a little tip that I like to do. All right, so yarn over, go in, pull up a loop, yarn over, go just through the first loop, yarn over, go through the next 2, yarn over, and go through the next 2. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to make 10 foundation double crochets plus 6 for my swatch. All right, so what you need to do is decide how wide you want to make your blanket. If you're making it the size of the pattern, you'll need 76. If you're adding more, remember multiples of 2 plus that's 6. If you're adding more to the 76, the 6 are already added in, just in case you're wondering. But for our swatch and for the demonstration, I'm going to be doing 10 foundation double crochets plus 6 more. So I've stitched 10 foundation double crochets plus 6. And just to repeat, if you're making the pattern the size I stated earlier, you'll need to have 76 foundation double crochets. We're going to chain 3. This chain 3 counts as our first double crochet. Turn your work and stitch a double crochet in the next stitch because that chain 3 counts as our first stitch. And then we'll stitch 1 double crochet in each of those foundation double crochets across. And we're not adding or subtracting any stitches. However many you began with is the same as this row. So we'll just stitch 1 double crochet in each of the double crochets across. 1 double crochet in each double crochet foundation across. Chain 3 and turn. Our chain 3 here counts as our first double crochet, and so we're going to double crochet in the next 2 stitches. And now we're going to do a row of cross stitches. So we're going to skip the next stitch. We're going to double crochet in the next stitch. Then we're going to double crochet and cross back into that stitch that we skipped. And I go from behind and come through. And there's our first cross. We're going to have the same amount of stitches because we're still stitching double crochets. We're just putting them in different places. So we'll skip the next stitch and double crochet in the next. Then we'll double crochet back in that stitch we skipped. Skip the next stitch, double crochet in the next. Yarn over and cross back and double crochet in that skipped stitch. Skip the next, double crochet in the next, cross back and double crochet in that skipped stitch. And so now what you're going to do is you're going to repeat your cross stitches until you reach those last 3 stitches, which I have one more. Then you'll double crochet in these last 3 stitches. And chain 3. And so this is the way that this row will work. You'll have 3 double crochets at the beginning and your chain 3 counts as your first one. You'll do cross stitches all the way across until you reach those last 3 double crochets, and you'll stitch 1 double crochet in the last 3. If you're stitching it according to the pattern, you'll have 76 stitches still, but you'll have 3 and then you'll have 35 crosses and then you'll have 3 double crochets. 3 double crochets, 35 crosses, and 3 double crochets because a cross is 2 double crochets. All right, and so that's how the pattern works. No matter how wide you've made yours, you should have 3 double crochets at the beginning and 3 double crochets at the end with all your cross stitches in between. We did our chain 3 and we turn. And we're going to begin the same as we did for this row. Our chain 3 counts as our first, then we double crochet in the next 2. And that brings us to our cross stitches. This part is a little more complicated, but once you figure it out, it's super easy. So what we're going to do is we're going to double crochet in between those 2 stitches that made the cross. So we just slide our hook in there and stitch 2 double crochets. And what that does is it sort of opens up the cross so that it looks like an awareness ribbon. All right, and we're going to do this all the way across. We do 2 double crochets in between those 2 double crochets from the cross stitch from the previous row, and we stitch 2 double crochets in there. Slide your hook in between those 2 double crochets from the cross stitch and stitch 2 double crochets. See, although it seemed a little bit complicated and looked a little bit complicated, it's not complicated at all. Just slide your hook in between and stitch 2 double crochets in each of those crosses. All right, and you do this all the way across your row in each one of those cross stitches, and then that brings you to those last 3 stitches of the row, and you stitch 1 double crochet in each of those stitches. And chain 3. All right, your stitch count remains the same because we have the 3 double crochets at the beginning and the end, and then we stitch 2 double crochets in the top of each of the cross stitches, and so we haven't added any extra double crochets. And again, we're stitching double crochets, we're just putting them in different places. We've stitched our chain 3 and turn. Now this row, row 5, we're just going to stitch 1 double crochet in each double crochet across. Our chain 3 again counts as our first double crochet, and then we'll stitch 1 double crochet in each of the double crochets across. And again, our stitch count will remain the same because we didn't add or subtract any double crochets. One double crochet in each double crochet across. Whoops, got a little splitty there. All righty. So 1 double crochet in each double crochet across, and again, if you're doing the pattern according to what I have written, you'll have 76 double crochets. And whatever you're doing as far as your stitch count, it should remain the same on every single row. So now what you're going to continue to do is to repeat row 3, 4, and 5 over and over again for 28 more rows. Of course, that's if you're making the size that is in the pattern. If you want to make it longer, continue to repeat row 3, 4, and 5 until it's the length that you want for your blanket. And once you have repeated those 3 rows until it's the length that you want for your blanket, you need to end on a solid double crochet row, and then we're going to just stitch 1 more solid double crochet row, just to give the bottom of your blanket a nice edge. Almost there. And then once you've completed that last row of double crochet, you'll just tie off and weave in your end. And it's very important that you weave your ends in tightly when you're going to make a blanket, that's especially if it's a lap gan or lap blanket, because it's going to be washed quite a bit. And one thing I found with using some of these slipperier yarns, like this Premier DK, it's a great yarn. It makes a beautiful blanket. And even the Mandela and the other yarns that you use will make a beautiful blanket. But this yarn can be just a little bit slippy. And I'm going to show you what I do to weave that in. I'm going to go to the back side of the blanket, and I'm just doing this end here. And what I do is I try to go through some of the fibers of the stitches, going through. See how that went through that fiber? I'll go up one way, I'll turn back, go back another way, I should say the other way, and see how I'm going through some of the fibers of the stitch? And then I'll turn, and I'm going to continue doing this until I run out of yarn, as far as the tail of yarn. And when you tie off, cut yourself off about 5 or 6 inches. You want this to stay put. You don't want to put any knots, but you want it to stay put, and you want it to be secure. So make sure you go back and forth and through some of the fibers of the stitches. Don't go through the holes of the stitches. Go through the stitches themselves, because you want this to be able to go through the wash and be washed, especially if it's a lap blanket or any blanket. This is my completed blanket, and I wanted you to see the stitches and how pretty this yarn is with it.